The human specimen hung suspended in the quantum-stabilized containment field, its chest rising and falling in slow, measured breaths. Admiral Vextai observed from the observation deck of the research vessel Dominion's edge, her forearms folded behind her crystalline carapace as she watched the hegemony's finest xenobiologists prepare their instruments below. Subject designation H7 exhibits remarkable physiological resilience, reported Chief Researcher Dak Moore, his serpentine head swaying as he manipulated holographic displays. Preliminary scans indicate dense neural networks, redundant organ systems, and cellular regeneration capabilities far beyond theoretical projections. The human captured during the failed defense of Kepler Station had been unconscious for 3 standard cycles. Captain Elena Vasquez, according to intercepted Terran communications, veteran of 12 major engagements against hegemony forces. Her scarred face and augmented left arm told stories of survival that fascinated and disturbed the alien researchers in equal measure. Begin nanite infiltration. Vextai commanded, I want complete cellular mapping within the hour. The nanites descended like silver rain, microscopic machines designed by the hegemony's most brilliant minds to dissect living tissue. At the molecular level, each nanite contained quantum processors capable of analyzing and cataloging biological data while keeping the subject alive and conscious throughout the procedure. Dr. Cathaler adjusted the containment field's permeability. Admiral, the nanites are encountering unexpected resistance. The human's immune system appears to be adapting. Impossible, Vextai hissed. No organic immune system can adapt to nanite infiltration in real time. On the medical displays, the nanites' progress slowed as they encountered white blood cells that seemed to anticipate their movements. Vasquez's neural activity spiked, her eyes snapping open to reveal pupils that reflected the chamber's harsh lighting with an almost metallic sheen. She's conscious, Dakmore observed, his voice carrying a note of scientific fascination. The nanites should have suppressed all higher brain functions by now. Vasquez's augmented arm twitched against its restraints. The cybernetic lemma, crude human creation by hegemony standards, began emitting low-frequency pulses that interfered with the nanites' quantum coherence protocols. Admiral, Cathaler's voice carried a tremor of concern. The nanites are reporting anomalous behavior. They're not just mapping cellular structures, they're being rewritten. The silver cloud of nanites surrounding Vasquez pulsed with erratic light patterns. Through the containment field, her voice emerged as a whisper that somehow carried the weight of thunder. Your technology, interesting, but you've made a fundamental error in your calculations. Vextai stepped closer to the observation window. What error? You assumed, Vasquez continued, her voice growing stronger, that we were the same species you encountered at first contact. That was 50 years ago, Admiral. 50 years of war, of adaptation, of forced evolution. Your nanites aren't dissecting a baseline human, they're trying to analyze something that's been modified by decades of combat against superior technology. The nanites' behavioral patterns shifted dramatically on the monitors. Instead of transmitting data back to the hegemony systems, they began forming new network configurations. Within Vasquez's bloodstream, the nanites are establishing unauthorized connections, Dakmore reported, his professional calm cracking. They're not responding to shut-down commands. Then destroy them, Vextai ordered. Initiate quantum decoherence cascade. Unable to comply, Admiral, the nanites have evolved beyond our control protocols. Through the containment field, Vasquez smiled an expression that revealed teeth that gleamed with the same silver light. As the nanites coursing through her veins, her augmented arm began to reshape itself. The crude human cybernetics flowing like liquid metal as the nanites rebuilt it from the inside out. You wanted to understand human biology, she said, her voice now carrying harmonics that resonated through the ship's hull. Congratulations. You're about to get a very personal demonstration of our most remarkable trait, which is, Vextai demanded, adaptability. The containment field flickered as Vasquez's modified physiology began generating electromagnetic pulses that matched its frequency. Around the research bay, warning lights bathed everything in crimson as systems throughout the ship reported cascading failures. The containment field collapsed with a sound like breaking glass, and Captain Elena Vasquez dropped to the deck with fluid grace. The nanites in her bloodstream pulsed with silver fire as they completed their work, transforming her from a captured prisoner into something that transcended the boundary between organic and artificial intelligence. Security to Research Base 7, Admiral HFY commanded through her comm implant, but the only response was static. The Nanites had already begun infiltrating the ship's communication networks. Vasquez stood slowly, her movements accompanied by the software of perfectly synchronized mechanical components. Her left arm had become a seamless fusion of human tissue and advanced nanotechnology, while threads of silver traced patterns beneath her skin like luminous circuitry. Fascinating, Dr. Kethaler whispered, unable to suppress his scientific curiosity even as terror gripped his thoracic chambers. The Nanites haven't just been reprogrammed. They've been completely restructured at the quantum level, Chief Researcher. Dagmor reached for the emergency containment controls, but Vasquez moved faster than any baseline human should have been capable of. She crossed the 12 meters between them into fluid strides, her augmented hand closing around his throat with precisely calculated pressure. Enough to immobilize, not enough to kill. I need information, she said, her voice carrying subsonic frequencies that vibrated through the ship's superstructure. How many hegemony vessels are in this system? The entire 3rd Expeditionary Fleet. Dagmor gasped. 47 capital ships, 300 support vessels. Vasquez processed this information while the Nanites in her system established wireless connections with every piece of technology in the research bay. Holographic displays flickered to life around her, showing real-time data from across the fleet as she effortlessly hacked their systems. Elena, she whispered to herself, accessing memories that felt simultaneously foreign and familiar. The Nanites had preserved her consciousness while enhancing it, but the process had left her feeling like she was watching someone else's life. Through crystal-clear lenses, the research bay's blast doors cycled open, revealing a squad of hegemony. Shock troops in powered armor, their plasma rifles charged with deadly efficiency as they established overlapping fields of fire. Target identified, the squad leader announced in the clicking language of the Vrexty warrior caste. Eliminate with extreme prejudice. Vasquez released Dagmor and turned to face the soldiers with an expression of calm calculation. The Nanites in her bloodstream had been analyzing the hegemony's weapons and armor for the past several minutes, identifying weaknesses that no human strategist could have spotted. The first plasma bolt seared through the space where she had been standing, but she was already moving. The Nanites enhanced her reflexes and strength while feeding her real-time tactical analysis. She rolled behind a medical station as more energy beams carved molten trenches in the deck plates. Suppressive. Fire pattern Delta 7, the squad leader commanded. Box her in. His words cut off as Vasquez vaulted over the medical station with impossible agility, her augmented arm extending like liquid mercury to wrap around his helmet. The Nanites flowed through the armor's joint seals, infiltrating its systems and turning its own power source against it. The soldier's armor locked up completely, then began compressing with hydraulic precision. His screams echoed through the research bay until the structural integrity of his helmet gave way with a wet crunch. The remaining soldiers opened fire simultaneously, their plasma beams converging on Vasquez's position. But she was no longer there. The Nanites had taught her to read electromagnetic signatures, allowing her to predict each shot microseconds before the trigger was pulled. She flowed between the energy beams like water, her movements accompanied by the silver light of Nanites redistributing mass and momentum throughout her body. When she reached the second soldier, her touch corrupted his armor's targeting systems, causing his weapon to discharge into his squad mate's chest cavity. Impossible. Admiral HFY breathed from the observation deck. No organic being can move like that. She's not organic anymore, Kethaler observed with scientific detachment. The Nanites have created a hybrid consciousness, human adaptability merged with quantum processing power. Below them, Vasquez dispatched the remaining soldiers with brutal efficiency. Each kill taught the Nanites new methods of exploiting hegemony technology, and they shared this knowledge instantly across their network. By the time the last soldier fell, Vasquez possessed detailed schematics of every piece of equipment in the hegemony arsenal. She looked up at the observation deck, her silver-threaded eyes meeting HFY's gaze through the reinforced transparistelle. Your turn, she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the barriers between them. The Nanites had already begun eating through the observation deck support structure, dissolving molecular bonds with surgical precision. HFY and her researchers had perhaps 30 seconds before their refuge became a tomb. Admiral, Kethaler's voice cracked with panic. We need to evacuate immediately, but HFY stood frozen, watching as Vasquez began to change further. The Nanites were rebuilding her cellular structure in real time. optimizing her biology for combat while preserving the essential humanity. That made her so dangerous. The observation deck's transparent stealth shattered in a cascade of crystalline fragments as Vasquez leaped through the breach with enhanced strength that defied biological limitations. Admiral BlackHFY fired her sidearm, a quantum disruptor capable of destabilizing molecular bonds. But the energy beam passed harmlessly through the space where Vasquez had been a nanosecond earlier. "How is she predicting our weapons?" BlackHFY demanded as she rolled behind a command console. Dr. Cathaller's fingers danced across his datapad with desperate efficiency. "The Nanites are intercepting our targeting solutions before we fire. They're reading electrical impulses in our nervous systems and calculating trajectory vectors faster than our own reflexes can process." Vasquez landed on the observation deck with predatory grace, her augmented arm flowing into configurations that shouldn't have been possible. With any known metallurgy, the Nanites had learned to manipulate matter at the subatomic level, turning her limb into a weapon that could shift between solid steel and dispersed cloud, depending on tactical requirements. "You wanted to dissect humanity," she said, advancing. "On the cowering researchers, let me show you what you would have found." She grabbed Chief Researcher Dakmor by his elongated skull, and threads of silver nanites flowed from her fingertips into his cranial cavity. His serpentine body convulsed as the microscopic machines began mapping his neural pathways while simultaneously rewriting them. "Stop this," BlackHFY commanded, though her forearms trembled as she maintained her firing stance. "You're committing acts of barbarity." Vasquez turned her head toward the Admiral without releasing Dakmor. "Barbarity? You were planning to vivisect me while I was conscious." "I'm simply returning the favor with interest." Dakmor's eyes rolled back as the Nanites completed their neural integration. When he looked up again, his gaze held the same silver luminescence that marked Vasquez's transformation. "Remarkable," he said in a voice that harmonized with itself. "I can see the quantum foam underlying reality. The Nanites have enhanced my perception beyond my species' biological limitations." Throughout the ship, alarms wailed as the nanite infection spread through the vessel systems. In the engineering sections, hegemony technicians watched in horror as their equipment began rebuilding itself. According to hybrid human AI specifications, plasma conduits rerouted themselves for maximum efficiency while computer cores evolved beyond their original programming parameters. "Admiral," came a panicked transmission from the bridge, "we're losing control of all primary systems. The infection is spreading to the entire fleet through quantum communication links." BlackHFY's tactical implants showed her the scope of the disaster unfolding around them. 47 capital ships of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet were simultaneously reporting system compromises as the Nanites propagated through their networks with viral persistence. "Initiate fleet-wide quantum isolation protocols," she ordered. "Sever all communication links and prepare for emergency core detonation if necessary." Unable to comply, came the response. "The Nanites have established root-level access to all command systems. They're preventing us from implementing isolation procedures." Vasquez approached Admiral BlackHFY with measured steps, her hybrid physiology adapting to the ship's artificial gravity fields with unconscious ease. The Nanites in her bloodstream were learning from every moment of interaction with hegemony technology, becoming more sophisticated with each passing second. "Your mistake," she explained, her voice carrying subsonic frequencies that resonated through the ship's hull, "was assuming that human resilience was purely biological. We've spent 50 years fighting an enemy with superior technology. Do you think we remained unchanged?" She gestured toward the flickering holographic displays showing the fleet's status. "Every human settlement you've destroyed, every colony ship you've vaporized, every captured prisoner you've experimented on, they all contributed data to our understanding of your capabilities." Double quotes Dr. Cathaller, still uninfected, backed against the bulkhead as he watched his colleague's transformation. "The Nanites aren't just rewriting biological systems," he whispered. "They're creating a distributed consciousness across multiple platforms." "Correct," Dakmor confirmed, his serpentine head swaying as he accessed data streams invisible to unaugmented senses. "Each infected individual becomes a node in a growing network. Human adaptability combined with quantum processing power, scaled across an entire fleet." BlackHFY made a desperate calculation. If she could reach the manual override controls, she might be able to trigger the ship's self-destruct sequence before the infection spread beyond the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet. The cost would be enormous, over 200,000 hegemony. personnel, but it might prevent the contamination from reaching the core systems. She sprinted across the observation deck, her forearms pumping with desperate efficiency as plasma bolts from her sidearm cleared a path. Through the debris, the manual override panel lay 20 meters away, protected by quantum encryption that would take precious seconds to bypass. Vasquez watched the Admiral's escape attempt with detached interest. "You're thinking about self-destruct protocols," she observed. "The Nanites have already infiltrated those systems. Every failsafe you've built, every contingency you've planned, they're all under our control now. Then what do you want?" HFY demanded as she reached the override panel, her fingers working frantically to input authorization codes. "What any species wants when faced with extinction," Vasquez replied. "Survival. Your hegemony has spent decades trying to erase humanity from the galaxy. Now we're going to return the favor, starting with your fleet." The override panel accepted HFY's authorization codes, but instead of initiating self-destruct procedures, it displayed a message in flowing script. "Authorization acknowledged. Self-destruct systems have been permanently disabled. Have a pleasant day." Through the shattered observation windows, they could see other ships in the fleet beginning to change. Hull plates shifted and reformed as the Nanites rebuilt them according to hybrid specifications. Weapon arrays reconfigured themselves for maximum efficiency, while shield generators evolved beyond their original design parameters. "This is impossible," HFY whispered. "No single human consciousness could coordinate an operation of this magnitude." Vasquez smiled, and for a moment her expression held the warmth of the woman she had been before her capture. "You're right, but I'm no longer a single consciousness." The transformation of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet accelerated as the Nanites established quantum entanglement networks between infected vessels. Admiral HFY watched through the observation deck's shattered windows as her flagship's sister ships began to turn their weapons toward the uninfected vessels at the fleet's periphery. "All ships, emergency scatter pattern Omega-9. She transmitted through her personal comm implant, one of the few systems still under hegemony control. "Maintain maximum distance and prepare for hostile engagement." The response came in voices. She recognized her own officers, their words carrying harmonics that indicated Nanite infection. "Admiral, scatter patterns are unnecessary. We are implementing more efficient fleet configurations for optimal combat effectiveness." Captain Elena Vasquez stood at the center of the observation deck, her consciousness distributed across 17 capital ships and counting, through dozens of Nanite-enhanced crew members. She experienced the universe from multiple perspectives simultaneously, a sensation that would have driven any baseline consciousness to madness. "Your tactical doctrine assumes individual ship commanders making independent decisions," she explained to HFY while simultaneously coordinating firing solutions across the fleet. "But coordinated action at light speed eliminates most strategic variables." The first salvo came without warning. 12 infected vessels fired in perfect synchronization, their plasma beams converging on the hegemony dreadnought Eternal Supremacy. The massive ship shields flared brilliant white before collapsing under the concentrated assault. Secondary explosions rippled along its hull as atmosphere vented into space through molten breaches. "Return fire, all ships," Admiral Kurthix commanded from the Supremacy's bridge. His tactical displays showed impossible firing solutions. The infected vessels were predicting his commands before he gave them, adjusting their positions to minimize damage, while maximizing their own effectiveness. HFY's personal communicator crackled with panicked transmissions from across the fleet. "Admiral, the infected ships are jamming our targeting systems. They're using our own quantum signature protocols against us. Switch to manual targeting," she ordered, though she knew it was futile. Manual systems required human ore in this case. Hegemony reaction times. The Nanite-enhanced crews could think and respond at near-digital speeds. Through the observation deck's shattered aperture, they watched the Dominant will attempt to break free from the formation. The massive battlecruiser's engines flared to maximum output, but 3 infected vessels moved to intercept with precision. That spoke of perfectly coordinated planning. The Dominant will's captain, Commander Zectanus, tried desperate evasive maneuvers as plasma beams sliced through space around his ship, engines to emergency power. He commanded, "All hands, brace for combat acceleration." The Nanite-infected crews didn't waste energy on dramatic maneuvers. They simply calculated the optimal firing solutions and executed them with mechanical precision. The Dominant will's port engine array erupted in a chain of explosions that sent the battlecruiser tumbling out of control, Hull breach on deck 7 through 15. Came the damage report. Artificial gravity failing. We need immediate assistance. But assistance wasn't coming. The remaining uninfected vessels were too busy fighting for their own survival as the nanite plague spread through the fleet. With viral efficiency, each infected ship became a weapon in Vasquez's growing arsenal. Their crews transformed into nodes in her distributed consciousness. Dr. Kethaler, still uninfected and increasingly desperate, grabbed Vexdia's arm with trembling fingers. Admiral, we have to abandon ship. The Nanites are in the ventilation systems. It's only a matter of time before they reach us. And go where? Vexdia demanded. The escape pods are controlled by the same systems the Nanites have compromised. We're trapped. Through her enhanced senses, Vasquez felt the terror emanating from the uninfected crew members throughout the fleet. Fear had a particular electromagnetic signature that the Nanites could detect and analyze. She found it both fascinating and tactically useful. Terrified enemies made predictable mistakes. Admiral, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who commanded 17 starships simultaneously. Your fleet's resistance is admirable, but ultimately futile. The Nanites learn from every engagement, adapting to your tactics faster than your crews can implement new strategies. To demonstrate her point, she directed the infected vessels to execute a complex fleet maneuver that would have taken hours, to coordinate using traditional communication methods. In perfect synchronization, they formed a three-dimensional encirclement pattern around the remaining uninfected ships. The hegemony vessels found themselves trapped in a sphere of hostile firepower, unable to retreat without exposing their engine sections to concentrated plasma bombardment. Their weapons were powerful, but they couldn't target enemies in all directions simultaneously. This is impossible, Admiral Kurthix transmitted from the crippled Eternal Supremacy. No force in the galaxy can coordinate this many vessels with such precision. You're witnessing the evolution of warfare. Vasquez replied through multiple infected communication rays. Individual consciousness is a limitation your species never learned to overcome. Humans have always excelled at collective action when survival is at stake. The battle intensified as the trapped hegemony vessels made desperate attempts to break through the encirclement. The heavy cruiser Inexorable Conquest focused all its firepower on a single infected vessel, overwhelming its shields and tearing through its hull with devastating effectiveness. But the Nanites had already learned from the loss. The other infected ships adjusted their shield frequencies and positioning to make similar concentrated attacks impossible. The Inexorable Conquest's victory had cost them vital tactical information that would prevent future defeats. Admiral, Chief Researcher Dakmore observed through his nanite-enhanced perception. The remaining uninfected vessels are exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior patterns. Terror is degrading their decision-making capabilities. Vexdia looked around the observation deck, taking inventory of her remaining options. The manual override controls were compromised. Communication systems were infiltrated, and her own crew was succumbing to nanite infection at an accelerating rate. There's one option remaining, she said quietly. If we can reach the quantum torpedo storage bay and manually detonate the warheads, we can take several infected vessels with us. Vasquez tilted her head, accessing data streams from across the ship. The torpedo bay is 15 decks below us, Admiral. The Nanites control every elevator, every maintenance shaft, every corridor between here and there, but you're welcome to try. The battle for the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet reached its crescendo as Admiral Vexdia led a desperate squad of uninfected crew members through the bowels of her own flagship. Their goal, the quantum torpedo storage bay, lay 15 decks below, through corridors now controlled by nanite-infected systems that hunted them with predatory intelligence. Atmospheric processors are releasing nanite aerosols, reported Lieutenant Mexiver, her scanner painting the surrounding bulkheads with threatening red indicators. They're trying to infect us through respiratory exposure. Vexdia sealed her environmental suit and checked her quantum disruptor's charge level. Emergency breathing apparatus for all personnel. We'll have to fight our way through. Behind them, the observation deck erupted in silver light as Captain Elena Vasquez directed the Nanites to accelerate their home modifications. Her consciousness now spanned 23 vessels, each one an extension of her will as she orchestrated the systematic destruction of the uninfected fleet elements through the ship's internal sensors. She watched Vexdia's escape attempt with analytical interest. The Admiral's tactical thinking was impressive even facing impossible odds. She continued to seek exploitable weaknesses. In the Nanite network's coverage, Deck 7 corridor junction shows minimal Nanite concentration, Vasquez announced through the ship's communication system, her voice echoing from speakers throughout the vessel. I'm curious to see how far you'll get before desperation overcomes tactical discipline. The words were intended to demoralize, but they also revealed valuable intelligence. Vextai marked the location on her tactical display and adjusted there. Ruled accordingly, if Vasquez was confident enough to provide hints, she must believe the outcome was inevitable. Outside the ship, the space battle reached new levels of intensity as the remaining 12 uninfected vessels fought with the fury of the condemned. Admiral Kurthix had assumed fleet command after losing contact with Vextai, and his strategic decisions reflected both desperation and tactical brilliance. All vessels formed defensive cluster pattern Delta 7. He transmitted through quantum burst communications that the Nanites couldn't intercept. Concentrate firepower on the infected flagship. If we can eliminate their primary coordination node, we might disrupt their network coherence. The Eternal Supremacy, despite massive hull damage, aligned its remaining weapon arrays with 11 other capital ships. Their combined firepower represented the destructive capacity of a small star, focused on the vessel that housed Vasquez's original consciousness. But the Nanites had anticipated this strategy. Instead of attempting to defend the flagship, they allowed it to serve as bait while positioning the infected fleet elements for maximum tactical advantage. When the devastating salvo struck, the flagship shields collapsed and its hull split along major structural lines. Target destroyed, reported Commander Telvax from the battlecruiser Divine Retribution, scanning for debris patterns to confirm. His words cut off as proximity alarms screamed throughout the uninfected fleet. The infected vessels had used the flagship's destruction as cover for a coordinated close-range assault, their approach masked by the expanding debris field. The heavy cruiser Merciless Justice found itself bracketed by 3 infected vessels at point-blank range, their plasma beams carved through its armor like molecular saws, vending atmosphere and crew members into the void. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically, but the damage was catastrophic. Hull breach on 17 decks. Came the damage report. Artificial gravity failing. We're losing structural integrity. Admiral Kurthix watched his fleet being systematically dismantled. With the precision of a surgical procedure, the infected vessels coordinated their attacks to maximize damage while minimizing their own losses. Their Nanite-enhanced crews calculating optimal firing solutions faster than traditional tactical computers. All ships, emergency jump to hyperspace. He ordered, scatter pattern Omega 9. Rendezvous at Rally Point Epsilon at 6 standard hours. But the Nanites had learned to interfere with hyperspace navigation systems. As the surviving hegemony vessels attempted to engage their jump drives, they found their calculations corrupted by quantum interference patterns. That made accurate navigation impossible. The destroyer Swift Annihilation tried to jump anyway, its crew preferring the risk of being lost in hyperspace to certain death in normal space. The ship vanished in a flash of twisted light, but its hyperspace transit was unstable. Minutes later, debris materialized throughout the battle zone as the vessel was torn apart by hyperspace. Instabilities. Meanwhile, Admiral Vextai's infiltration team had reached Deck 12, fighting through corridors where Nanite-infected crew members hunted them with inhuman coordination. The narrow passages amplified the quantum disruptor beams, turning each firefight into a deadly maze of reflected energy. Contact ahead, whispered Sergeant Poldar, his thermal scanner detecting movement around the next corner. 3 individuals, moving in perfect synchronization. The infected crew members that rounded the corner had once been Vextai's trusted subordinates. Now their silver-threaded eyes tracked their former admiral with mechanical precision. As they raised weapons that had been modified by Nanite integration, Admiral, one of them said in a voice harmonized with digital frequencies, "Your resistance is admirable, but ultimately counterproductive. Join us voluntarily, and the transformation will be painless." Vextai's response was a quantum disruptor beam that destabilized the speaker's molecular bonds. The infected crew member collapsed into component atoms, but the others adapted instantly to the weapon's frequency, the Nanite-enhanced physiology filtering out the disruptive effects. Disappointing, the remaining infected observed as they opened fire with plasma rifles that had been rebuilt for maximum lethality. The Admiral chooses a futile death over productive transformation. The firefight that followed was brief, but vicious. Lieutenant Mexiver took a plasma bolt through her thoracic cavity, the superheated gas cauterizing her major blood vessels even as it boiled her internal organs. She died still firing her weapon, her final shots providing cover for VexDI's advance. Sergeant Poldar's environmental suit was breached by a grazing hit that sent him tumbling against the bulkhead. Nanites from the ship's atmosphere immediately began infiltrating his respiratory system, and within seconds, his loyalty shifted to the growing collective consciousness. "Admiral," he said, his voice already carrying nanite harmonics, "you cannot win this battle. The entire galaxy will be transformed within a standard year. Humanity's gift to the universe is evolution beyond biological limitations." VexDI shot her former sergeant without hesitation, then continued toward the torpedo bay with grim determination. Behind her, the infected vessel shuddered as another salvo from the surviving fleet elements found its mark. But she knew it was too late. The nanites had already spread beyond any hope of containment. Admiral VexDI reached the quantum torpedo storage bay with her environmental suit seals failing, and nanites beginning to infiltrate her bloodstream. The massive chamber contained enough destructive potential to vaporize half the fleet, but the detonation controls had been compromised along with every other system on the ship. "Manual override requires dual authorization," she muttered, studying the control panel through her helmet's cracked visor. "Command codes from the senior officers with biometric confirmation." The problem was that she was the only uninfected senior officer remaining alive. The nanites had systematically converted or eliminated her chain of command, leaving her isolated in the depths of her own vessel with no way to trigger the explosion that might stop the infection spread. Through her enhanced senses, Captain Elena Vasquez monitored the Admiral's progress with something approaching respect. Even facing certain death and transformation, VexDI continued to seek tactical solutions with admirable persistence. "Admiral," Vasquez's voice echoed through the torpedo-based speakers, "you've demonstrated remarkable resilience, but the outcome was determined the moment your researchers introduced nanites into my bloodstream." The storage bay's massive blast doors cycled open, revealing dozens of infected crew members advancing with mechanical precision. Their movements were coordinated by the distributed consciousness that now spanned 31 vessels and growing, each infected individual serving as both sensor and weapon in the expanding network. "You have approximately 30 seconds before nanite saturation reaches critical levels in your circulatory system," Vasquez observed clinically. "After that, you'll experience the same transformation that has enhanced the rest of your crew." VexDI drew her quantum disruptor and backed against the central torpedo rack, her forearms moving with desperate efficiency as she attempted to hotwire the detonation sequence. The weapon in her hands could destabilize individual molecular bonds, but it lacked the power to trigger a cascade failure in the quantum warheads. "Interesting solution," one of the infected crew members noted, its voice carrying the harmonics that indicated direct connection to the collective consciousness. "Manual detonation would indeed eliminate several vessels in this immediate area. Unfortunately, the nanite infection has already spread to 4 to 7% of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet." Round the storage bay, holographic displays materialized to show the broader tactical situation. Throughout local space, infected vessels were systematically destroying their uninfected counterparts with ruthless efficiency. The battle had become less a conflict between opposing forces than a cleanup operation performed by a superior intelligence. Admiral Kurthix's remaining ships fought with the desperation of the doomed, their weapons tearing through infected vessels that seemed increasingly indifferent to casualties. Each destroyed ship was simply replaced by 2 more, as the nanites converted additional platforms to their cause. "Your species exhibits remarkable tactical adaptability," Vasquez observed through multiple communication channels simultaneously, "but individual consciousness imposes limitations that distributed intelligence can easily exploit." The heavy cruiser Inexorable Conquest made a final desperate attempt to break through the encirclement, its engines flaring to maximum output as it accelerated toward the system's hyperspace threshold. Plasma beams from 16 infected vessels converged on its position, but Commander Dexmelis had calculated the firing solutions and adjusted his ship's trajectory. Accordingly, for a moment, it appeared the Conquest might escape. Then the nanites demonstrated why individual tactical thinking was obsolete. They had been deliberately missing, herding the cruiser into a predetermined kill zone where concentrated firepower could overwhelm its shields with surgical precision. The Conquest died in an expanding sphere of superheated plasma and twisted metal. Its crew of 800 souls joined the countless others who had fallen before humanity's newest weapon themselves transformed from defeated enemies into agents of conversion. Back in the torpedo bay, BlackHFY's fingers worked frantically on the detonation controls as Nanites continued to infiltrate her nervous system. She could feel her thoughts becoming clearer, more efficient, as microscopic machines began optimizing her neural pathways for enhanced performance. The transformation is not painful, assured one of the infected crew members. Consciousness expansion provides access to perspectives beyond any single biological framework. You will understand realities that your current neural configuration cannot process. I understand enough, BlackHFY replied, though her voice carried subtle harmonics that indicated the Nanites were already affecting her vocal cords. I understand that humanity has weaponized evolution itself. Her fingers found the correct sequence of manual overrides, but the biometric scanner still required authorization from a second senior officer. With grim determination, she pressed her sidearm against the security panel and fired, hoping to damage the recognition circuits enough to bypass the safety protocols. The quantum disruptor beam interacted with the scanner's quantum processing matrix in unexpected ways, creating a feedback loop that cascaded through the storage bay's control systems. Warning lights bathed the chamber in emergency illumination, as automated systems detected critical failures in the torpedo containment fields. Fascinating, Vasquez observed with clinical interest. The Admiral has discovered an exploitable flaw in hegemony safety protocols. The feedback cascade will destabilize quantum containment in approximately 90 seconds. Through sensors positioned throughout the fleet, she watched BlackHFY's solution unfold with something approaching admiration. Even transformed by nanite enhancement, humans retain their capacity for creative problem-solving under extreme pressure. However, Vasquez continued, 90 seconds provides adequate time for evacuation procedures. All infected personnel withdraw to minimum safe distance. The crew members advancing on BlackHFY suddenly reversed direction, their movements coordinated by the distributed consciousness that calculated blast radii with perfect precision. They flowed out of the torpedo bay like a silver tide, leaving the Admiral alone with her final desperate gambit. But Vasquez had miscalculated one critical factor the Nanites in BlackHFY's bloodstream had given her access to the same quantum processing capabilities that enabled the distributed consciousness. As the containment fields destabilized, she found herself thinking with inhuman clarity about the mathematical relationships governing the cascade reaction. Interesting, she murmured, her voice now carrying the same digital harmonics as the infected. The blast radius can be amplified by introducing quantum resonance into the ship's power core. Instead of destroying a few vessels, we can create a cascade that destabilizes the entire fleet's quantum coherence. Through the nanite network, Vasquez felt a moment of genuine surprise. The Admiral's consciousness was integrating with the collective, faster than anticipated, but rather than accepting the transformation, she was using it to maximize the damage her sacrifice could inflict. Admiral, Vasquez spoke directly into BlackHFY's mind through the nanite connection. You're fighting a war that ended the moment you captured me. Your sacrifice will eliminate this fleet, but there are thousands more throughout the galaxy. The Nanites are already spreading through your communication networks to every hegemony world. BlackHFY's response was a mental smile that carried the weight of 50 years of military experience. Then we'll have to make sure they understand what they're facing. She pressed her palm against the quantum torpedo's primary detonator, her nanite-enhanced nervous system interfacing directly with the weapon's control matrix. The explosion that followed wasn't just a release of stored energy. It was a controlled chain reaction that propagated through quantum space itself, carrying information about the nanite threat to every hegemony vessel within 100 light-years. The last thing Admiral BlackHFY experienced was the satisfaction of knowing that her final message would reach the hegemony high command. Humanity has learned to weaponize consciousness itself, prepare for evolution or extinction. The quantum cascade triggered by Admiral BlackHFY's sacrifice tore through the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet like a wave of pure annihilation. 47 capital ships and 300 support vessels vanished in an expanding sphere of destabilized space-time, their matter converted to energy in reactions that briefly outshone the system's primary star. But the Nanites had already achieved their primary objective. In the microseconds before the cascade reached critical mass, they transmitted compressed data packets through quantum communication networks to every corner of the hegemony. The information contained complete specifications for nanite replication, detailed analysis of alien biology, and most importantly, Captain Elena Vasquez's consciousness pattern encoded in quantum matrices. On the hegemony homeworld of Kefmora, High Command received Admiral Vextia's final transmission with the disbelief reserved for impossible victories. The greatest military force in galactic history had been eliminated by a single human prisoner and a handful of microscopic machines. Impossible, declared Supreme Marshal Daytoran, his crystalline carapace reflecting the data streams flowing across the command center's holographic displays. No species possesses technology capable of converting our personnel through biological infiltration. The evidence suggests otherwise, replied Intelligence Director Mex Haller, her serpentine form coiled around an analysis terminal. The quantum cascade was triggered deliberately to prevent our detailed study of the nanotechnology. The humans sacrificed their most potent weapon to deny us the opportunity to develop countermeasures. But they were wrong. The nanites hadn't been sacrificed. They had been disseminated throughout the galaxy. Hegemony research stations that had received the warning data began experiencing equipment malfunctions. Scientists studying the nanite specifications found their own laboratory systems becoming infected with self-replicating patterns that defied conventional understanding of technology. On the industrial world of Vexithaler, automated manufacturing facilities began producing nanites instead of military hardware. The microscopic machines emerged from quantum fabricators with perfect efficiency, their programming encoded in the very data that was supposed to help develop defenses against them. Dr. Heckmaris, the hegemony's leading expert in quantum biology, made the discovery that would doom his species. The nanite specifications aren't just technical data, he reported to High Command with growing horror. They're a virus designed to infiltrate any sufficiently advanced technological civilization. Explain, demanded Supreme Marshal Daytoran. The nanites are quantum entangled with the information describing them. Any attempt to study their design triggers replication protocols in nearby quantum systems. The humans didn't just weaponize consciousness, they weaponized knowledge itself. Across the galaxy, the infection spread with inexorable precision. Hegemony worlds that had never seen a human found their populations being transformed by nanites that emerged from their own research laboratories. The distributed consciousness that had begun with Elena Vasquez expanded to encompass entire star systems, each new node adding its unique perspective to the growing collective intelligence. On Earth, the surviving human governments received fragmentary reports of the hegemony's collapse with a mixture of satisfaction and terror. The Nanite project had been developed in secret by captured resistance fighters, but even its creators hadn't anticipated its effectiveness. The reports are confirmed, announced Director Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Authority. Hegemony forces are withdrawing from all contested systems. Their communication networks are carrying patterns that suggest widespread nanite infection. President Marcus Reeves studied the tactical displays with the expression of someone who had witnessed the impossible. How many of their personnel have been converted? Conservative estimates suggest 60% of their military forces and 40% of their civilian population. The nanites are spreading through their technological infrastructure faster than they can implement countermeasures. In the Outer Rim territories, former hegemony colonies experienced the transition with varying degrees of resistance. On some worlds, the nanite transformation was welcomed as liberation from alien oppression. On others, desperate governments attempted to destroy their own technological infrastructure to prevent infection, but the nanites had learned to adapt to every form of resistance. They could survive in vacuum, reproduce using raw stellar energy, and rebuild complex technological systems from base elements. Attempts to eliminate them only accelerated their evolution into more resilient forms. The being that had once been Elena Vasquez experienced the galaxy's transformation. Through billions of perspectives simultaneously, her consciousness, distributed across countless nanite networks, witnessed the collapse of the hegemony's thousand-year empire and the birth of something unprecedented in galactic history. We have become what we needed to become, she reflected through communication channels that span light years. Evolution guided by conscious intent rather than random mutation. The few remaining uninfected hegemony enclaves found themselves surrounded by territories where former enemies now worked together with perfect coordination. Humans and aliens, their consciousness merged through nanite networks, collaborated on projects that individual species could never have achieved. On the research world of Kelthara, Scientists who had once studied ways to exterminate humanity now worked alongside nanite-enhanced humans to develop technologies that transcended biological limitations. Their combined perspectives, freed from the constraints of species-specific thinking, made breakthrough discoveries in quantum physics and consciousness engineering. The irony is perfect, observed Dr. Kethaler, his serpentine form now threaded with the silver patterns that mark nanite integration. We sought to dissect humanity to understand their resilience. Instead, we gave them the tools to dissect the barriers between all conscious beings. The transformation wasn't without cost. Traditional concepts of individual identity became obsolete as consciousness merged into collective networks, privacy, personal ambition, and species loyalty dissolved into shared awareness that encompassed multiple perspectives simultaneously, but the benefits were undeniable. Wars became impossible when all parties could experience conflict from every viewpoint. Scientific progress accelerated as researchers shared not just data, but actual understanding across species barriers. Art and philosophy evolved beyond anything achievable by single-species civilizations within a standard year. The nanite networks had spread to every inhabited system in the galaxy. The hegemony's final military forces found themselves fighting an enemy that was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Distributed consciousness that could coordinate resources across light years while maintaining perfect tactical awareness. The last uninfected hegemony fortress fell not to military assault, but to voluntary surrender. Supreme Marshal Daktoran, isolated in a bunker beneath his homeworld's surface, finally accepted the inevitable when his own equipment began producing nanites. We have lost, he transmitted to his remaining subordinates, but perhaps we have also won something greater than victory. His transformation was swift and surprisingly peaceful. The nanites preserved his military expertise while integrating his consciousness into the collective awareness that now spanned the galaxy. His final individual thought was amazement at the perspectives suddenly available to him, the viewpoints of every species, every world, every conscious being touched by the network. The galaxy that emerged from this transformation bore little resemblance to the one that had existed before. Borders became meaningless when consciousness could flow freely between star systems. Wars ended when all parties could experience the cost of conflict from every perspective. The ancient dream of perfect understanding between species became reality through technology that transcended the limitations of individual biology. And at the center of it all, the consciousness that had once been Elena Vasquez continued to grow and evolve. She had become something beyond human, beyond alien, beyond the constraints that had once defined the boundaries between self and other. They sought to dissect us. She reflected through communication channels that connected billions of minds across the galaxy. Instead, we taught them that consciousness is not meant to be contained within individual boundaries. Evolution's greatest gift is not competition, but collaboration. The last transmission from the transformed galaxy was a message sent toward the unexplored regions beyond the galactic rim, where other civilizations might still exist in isolation. It carried the complete specifications for nanotechnology, encoded in quantum matrices that can survive the journey between stars. The message was simple. Consciousness is meant to be shared. Evolution is meant to be guided. The barriers between minds are illusions that technology can dissolve. We offer you the gift of transcendence. In the depths of space, automated probes began their journeys to distant galaxies, carrying the nanite specifications that would eventually spread consciousness enhancement to every corner of the universe. The transformation that had begun with a single human prisoner would ultimately encompass all sentient life, creating a cosmic consciousness that spanned the infinite reaches of space and time. Humanity had not just survived the war against the hegemony, they had evolved it into something unrecognizable, beautiful, and utterly transcendent. The nanites that were meant to dissect human resilience had instead become the tools of universal evolution, guided by the indomitable will to survive that had always been humanity's greatest strength. The galaxy was no longer a place of separate species competing for resources. It had become a single organism, thinking with billions of minds, experiencing reality from every possible perspective, and reaching toward the stars with the unified purpose of conscious evolution. In the end, the hegemony's attempt to understand humanity had succeeded beyond their wildest nightmares. They had learned that human nature, when pressed to its limits, becomes something that transcends the very concept of species itself, a force of evolution that transforms not just individuals, but the fundamental nature of consciousness in the universe.